The president-elect has picked billionaire banker and his former campaign finance chair, Steven Mnuchin, as the next Treasury Secretary. For Commerce, it's investor Wilbur Ross, and for Transportation head, Elaine Chao, who served 8 years as Labor Secretary under President George W. Bush, and who's married to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
That's Goldman Sachs stock right now. Why is it doing that? The president-elect, of course, picked a senior advisor and chief strategist who's from Goldman Sachs. Today, he picked a new Treasury Secretary who's from Goldman Sachs and whose dad was a Goldman Sachs partner, a second-generation Goldman Sachs guy. News was also floated today that the deputy to the billionaire banker who is just named Commerce Secretary, that deputy Commerce Secretary will also be from Goldman Sachs. And for good measure, the president-elect today personally met with the current president of Goldman Sachs. So, yeah. Yeah, Goldman Sachs. This is Goldman Sachs stock now. They hit an 8-year high today. They haven't flown this close to the sun since the financial catastrophe of 2008. Good times.
My contract with the American voter begins with a plan to end government corruption and to take back our country and to take it back swiftly from the special interests who I know so well.
One other interesting announcement today. President-elect today also named one of the billionaires from the Ricketts family to be the deputy to the new billionaire Commerce Secretary. The Ricketts family, funny story there, not that long ago, they almost single-source financing behind the presidential campaign of Scott Walker for president. When Governor Scott Walker's presidential campaign died a fast and expensive death, the Ricketts family briefly flirted with going never Trump. But it's this very interesting moment in the campaign when they did that. Donald Trump at the time responded by publicly threatening the Ricketts family against spending money against them. He misspelled their name in the tweet, but you get the point there. He said, "I hear the Ricketts family are secretly spending money against me. They better be careful. They have a lot to hide." After Trump publicly threatened the Ricketts family over what they have to hide and spending money against him, after that, the Ricketts family decided that they would spend money to support Trump, after all. And now one of the billionaire Ricketts sons will be Deputy Secretary of the Treasury. And so things are shaping up. The administration is starting to staff up with its top names. It's turning into quite a full employment program for the nation's billionaires. Goldman Sachs has also taken all the seats around the table, as Goldman Sachs intended. Everything is falling into place. When the mortgage crisis hit in 2008, when banks started collapsing under the weight of the terrible mortgage scam they had been getting rich off for years with no regard for the knock-on consequences, when the crisis hit and Wall Street started to crater and firms started to collapse and the economy started to go off a cliff and everybody else was trying to figure out what we could do to save the economy, there were a few really rich guys who looked around at that ongoing nuclear economic disaster and thought, I bet I can make a buck here. One California billionaire decided he would make his buck in the great financial catastrophe of 2008 by getting together with a few other billionaires and buying one of the banks that had collapsed. Then once they had that bank, they then proceeded to kick 35,000 families out of their homes before selling that bank back to the government at a profit. There were a lot of villains in the financial crisis and its aftermath. Not all of them were villainous enough to get their own Bel Air mansions picketed by throngs of angry people who were being thrown out of their homes. But that was what happened in 2008. It was his 23,000 square foot, $26 million Bel Air mansion set upon by angry protesters. The protests eventually waned, though, and more recently, that same guy has been popping up at Trump Tower. A lot. And as of tonight, NBC News reports that that guy, his name is Steve Mnuchin, is being tapped by President-elect Donald Trump to be our nation's new Treasury Secretary. And this officially means that nobody is allowed to call Donald Trump a populist anymore. This ex-Goldman Sachs, the hedge fund billionaire, a guy who's literally described in headlines as a foreclosure machine. That's who Donald Trump is putting in charge at Treasury. Drain the swamp, baby.